Jack twist.
Yes.
When we made the picture, we knew there was going to be a core of serious moviegoers who would want to see the picture, but we had no idea, of course, that it was going to balloon the way it did.
It was a classical linear Hollywood story the way it was told, and yet the fact that this was a gay love story, I thought, well, that's very interesting, but I can't imagine that that's going to be a very big success in this country at this particular time, and obviously I was wrong about that.
It's a big step forward for gay themes in movies. I mean, this is a movie that people saw, you know, and people talked about it, and it was up for awards, and it was really, I think, a big part of the public consciousness.
It's controversial to someone who is uncomfortable with the topic. I understand why people call it controversial, but I like a bit of controversy, you know? Bring it on.
When Brokeback Mountain is discussed, it's often discussed in terms of where it falls in the lineup of socially conscious Hollywood movies. I do not believe that this movie was made primarily to advance certain social attitudes. It's only because we are in a particular time, a transitional time in the way that straight society views gay people, that we're even talking about this. And I think that 15, 20 years from now, or hopefully even 10 years from now, this discussion is going to seem hopelessly anachronistic.
Brokeback Mountain is a very conventional film, a very conservative film. It's a beautiful Western by a consummate director. It's a beautiful script by consummate writers. It's a beautiful story by a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer. The only thing that really makes this pop up out of a genuinely mainstream kind of product is the fact that it's about a love story between two men. And then suddenly, that shifts the way that everybody sees it.
As human beings, we tend to put labels on everything as a way to sort of categorize and feel safe about something. That script is about gay cowboys. Well, I'm not going to give that thing the time of day. I'm not going to waste my time on it. It's a way to reduce it to something very simple when it is something that isn't simple at all. At one point, I remember somebody saying to me, you know, Diana, this movie would get made a heck of a lot faster if it were about a man and a woman. That wouldn't make any sense. We wouldn't make that movie.
We've all kind of been told this cliche for so long, you know, and it's always a sort of a heterosexual love story is always like guy gets girl, guy loses girl, guy has to get girl back, and then they live happily ever after. And I think that it gives this weird notion of what love is supposed to be. And when I read this, it felt like the struggles and the trials that it takes to actually be in love and to keep it going, that's what it's about.
The script absolutely killed me. It absolutely got inside of me. It was not what I had thought it was going to be like, what it would be about. I was unaware that it was more than just a relationship between these two guys, but it was a relationship also with Alma, with these other characters whose lives all are affected by what happens when love enters this portrait.
To me, Brokeback Mountain is a love story. That's how I read it, how I like to make it. Of course, we got a gay theme here and all the complexities in the human relationship, gender issues, society issues, and the whole Western thing. But to me, it's a taste of love. It's very hard to articulate that with literature. For me, it's impossible. I have to make a movie.
Background! Be marked!
You ranch stiffs, you ain't never no good.
You heard random gossip during the production phase, and it was always a bit puzzling. Why are they making this movie? And Ang Lee, he's got a hard career to chart, you know, the Ice Storm, the Hulk. You say to yourself, no wait, a Western? And it's with these two characters who get involved. So there was just a bunch of questions. That's all you had. You didn't get much real intelligence about the movie when it was in production.
I'd heard about the film being made, of course. Lots of us have been following the anticipation, the excitement, the paranoia. You know, what was Ang Lee going to do with this film? What were Heath and Jake going to do with these roles? The gay press had been full of it. There was a lot of suspicion that they were going to heterosexualize the story.
It's just a story of love, and that love exists in all shapes and sizes and forms, and that it does transcend all. We recognized it as it being a beautiful story, and it's one that should be told.
You know, one of the funny things was we were making the movie, there was an enormous amount of internet web chatter about how the boys aren't going to kiss and it's going to be this disaster, they're going to sanitize the whole thing. And I said, you know what, just let it sit. Let's not get into extraneous arguments or, you know, kind of press publicity stuff right now, because when people see the movie, then they'll know.
We would rather the movie never get made than to be made dishonestly if it weren't made true to who these characters were.
It was a fall release, a fall movie. We knew we wanted to present the film in the best possible light for its initial screenings. And there was Venice, there was Telluride, there's Toronto, which were ideal locations, ideal audiences. And clearly the kind of firestorm of response that hit immediately, especially as Ang, you know, won Best Film at Venice while we were at Toronto. All that kind of stuff really helped. It's kind of that wonderful moment when it all comes together, you know, as a distributor, as a filmmaker, seeing those things happen.
We really had the support of critics, and that was a big deal. It felt like critics really came out to support this movie. We had reviewers saying, you must see this movie. And I think critics understood the importance of the movie and making it feel safe for people who might be nervous about it or the themes to go and see it. And once they did see it, they did really embrace it.
Now, Todd McCarthy, Variety's critic, liked the movie a lot, but he did say, marketing this picture to the public is going to be one of the major challenges of the ages. That was his exact phrase. So I think there was a lot of speculation that this picture would be hard to sell. So cut, it does $180 million worldwide in gross. I mean, that's an astonishing number.
I don't think that the box office of any movie has ever been watched as closely as this one was. Everyone was focused on how much of a success this would be. How did they define that? Would it be shown only in art houses? Would it get out of the multiplexes once it got into them? Would it get out of the cities? Would anyone anywhere else in the country want to see it? Would only gay people want to see it?
Certainly the gay lesbian audience needed to know that this film really represented a piece of their culture and their history in a unique but still real way. And that was important to us to you know, tend that garden and make sure that that community was embraced and felt a part of the process of bringing the film to the world. On the other hand, the movie, from my point of view, always was a true, great, big, gigantic romantic movie. I always, to Ang, was referencing movies like Dr. Zhivago, in that sense of kind of big, classic, unapologetically romantic filmmaking. And that is traditionally a woman's genre. So always the biggest test for us was, did it appeal directly to our female audience? Because in the world of specialized film, especially with your more mature audiences, it is the woman who makes the decision about which film to go to. And the guy would probably get dragged along, you know, more or less. And clearly you saw that happen.
You have to remember, this film was coming along a decade after a movement that I called the new queer cinema. They were coming out of this kind of political moment of, you know, we're here, we're queer, make a film about it. And that's not what Brokeback Mountain is. And I think it would have been equally deceptive to have marketed it that way. Because in fact, it's a genre film. You know, when I saw it at Toronto, I remember people coming out of the screening and saying, finally, we have our own Gone with the Wind.
The great thing about the marketing of Brokeback Mountain is that we followed the picture's lead. And we never wavered from that. We never tried to apologize for the picture. We never tried to create controversy or engage in it once other people tried to create it themselves. We always wanted to keep the movie front and center.
Now the tagline for the ads were, "Love is a force of nature." And the print ads certainly showed two men with that tagline. I'd be surprised if there was anyone in the United States who didn't know what that film was about.
The homophobic attack on the movie was two-pronged. There was a very, very thought-out, very organized initial assault on the movie.
There was probably a lot less of it, I think, than there might have been in the past, because the religious right has gotten savvy enough to know that if they start complaining about something, that they're only giving them more press. So a lot of them said, we're not going to talk about it, or, you know, you can imagine how we feel about it, but we're not going to give them the press.
If the film did 15 million or 20 or 25 or 30, which to us would have been just spectacular and wonderful, they could always say, see, you know, it's just this tiny little art house movie. And then, of course, as the film grew and grew and grew, they didn't have Plan B anymore. So the kind of homophobic right, which tried to turn this into a great non-story, so they could kind of smugly dismiss it, suddenly had no backup.
The film was essentially being marketed on the editorial page. It was being marketed on the gossip page. It was being marketed on the talk shows. It was being marketed by all of the right-wing pundits who were denouncing it.
You ever get the feeling, I don't know, when you're in town and someone looks at you, suspicious, like he knows, then you go out on the pavement and everyone's looking at you like they all know too?
Variety ran lots of stories about the relationship of exhibitors to the movie. The first thing we pointed out was that it was beginning to really get some serious traction in communities that you would think might be on the margin. So we ran story after story, day after day, about the fact that in more conventional mid-America, this picture was resonating. The acceptance of this picture all around the country is really astonishing. The other thing that's great about it is that at Oscar time, for example, it still was the kind of butt of a certain kind of humor. But by this time, the humor didn't make you uncomfortable. It was kind of embracing. It was real fun. And I think everyone gets a laugh about the Brokeback jokes.
There really haven't been a lot of sort of mainstream Hollywood movies that deal with gay subject matter. It opened that door to people to kind of make their gay joke about it in whatever way. I knew when I started seeing the internet parodies that it had tapped into the zeitgeist, because if there's something on YouTube that is goofing on you, then you've clearly struck a chord with the American public.
The parodies were, oddly, not of the movies, they were of the trailer. Probably the most strongly effective of these things. We're using the trailer as a template to cut trailers for classic Hollywood movies, in which you reconfigure the images from those movies from buddy movies to gay movies. And suddenly you saw these kind of, even from Back to the Future to Top Gun to whatever it was. I mean, there's literally 100 of them.
I've seen a lot of these spoofs, and they are affectionate. They're not hostile, they're not uncomfortable, they're affectionate. They're often very sweet. And the other thing that's striking about them is that there's so many different kinds of Brokeback Mountain spoofs.
You only parody something that really is also taken on its own life. Brokeback became part of the vernacular, and that's what's so exciting about a movie like this. It reminds you that movies can have a real impact on how we see the world.
Why don't you just let me be, huh? Because of you, Jack, that I'm like this.
The main goal in getting this film made was for people to go see it and to be moved in ways that surprised them, that they felt like they had come to know a world that maybe they didn't know anything about before.
We want enough people to come to this movie so every person who said to us over these many, many years that no one will go to see it, that we can feel like, see, people came to see it, it's a great movie, it affected people, it was a groundbreaking movie. You can make groundbreaking movies. People will come to see those movies. We just want enough people to come, so we felt like, see, pulled it off, and it really can work.
The fact that this was an incredibly well-made movie, a sexy, romantic, tragic, moving film, and that it was seen by an audience, and that it was talked about, and that it was one of the big nominees on Oscar night, I think it's sort of the new kind of beachhead for what we can accomplish in telling queer stories and telling them to a mass audience.
Most of all, the success of the picture is a reminder that good stories work, that you have interesting characters, that you have a picture that strikes people as being real and about real people. Then it's going to do great around the world.
The purpose of the movie, the intent of the movie, is not to change minds. It's simply to present this story. It's kind of strange to say, but in a way, the predicament of the movie mirrors the predicament of Jack and Ennis, which is to say that it is about what it seems to be about, ultimately no more and no less, and the context that's put around it is not something that is necessary. It's not something that should have been there in the first place. The story of these two guys should be able to breathe on its own, function on its own, but it can't because of the moment when it came out and the fact that it's probably a less hostile environment than it would have been in, say, 1980, but only a bit less so.
I would like to think that the new queer filmmakers coming out of film schools now can begin to really think about the whole range of filmmaking as their playground and can begin to get funding at a whole different level as a result.
I think that Brokeback Mountain's going to survive in a lot of ways. I think it's going to be one of those movies that we look back at like, Citizen Kane or 2001, where we're sort of horrified that it didn't win Best Picture, and how could it not, knowing now that it's this classic and that it stood the test of time. I think for a lot of people, it's going to be that movie that made it a little bit more okay to feel what they feel and to know about themselves. And I think it's going to be, certainly when we look back at the careers of the people involved, this is going to be a real landmark for all of them. This was a lot of people's first Oscar nominations, and it was a movie that brought a lot of these performers to the public attention in one way or another, or at least had us look at them differently. I think this is a movie that, as a film itself, is going to stand the test of time, but in the larger scope of film history is going to be significant.
What I did care about was making sure that people, especially young people out there, who, not the homophobes, but rather, let's say, a gay teen who's growing up in a small town and sees this movie coming to town and realizes his friends are going and teachers and community and people at the church and whatever, and suddenly people are talking. And those are the stories that I think most affected us. Those are the letters, and we still get emails and letters all the time from people who really were able to use the film to kind of reach out and feel less alone. They suddenly realized there's a big community out there.
I feel it's been a real education in a lot of ways, emotionally, intellectually, about people and about the power of literature and the power of film.
The sophistication of the average filmgoer in this country really has raised itself up in so many ways, so that people realize that you can have a huge emotional experience and not everybody has to look like you or talk like you or feel like you.